Now we are coming to the various plans. So we start with Europe, and within Europe we have the Netherlands. Netherlands have three types of coast. The island coast, the uninterrupted but segmented coast and Helder Hoek of Holland, in which we have a primary range of dunes, but there are segmentations caused by the harbor malls of Scheveningen, the river discharge at Katwijk, the harbor malls of IJmuiden, and the Hondsbos and Petmer sea defense. Then we have a third type of coast, which is an estuarine coast in transition state between Hoek of Holland and Flanders, belong to Belgium. There we see a dominance of southwest-oriented coastlines in the peninsular panhandles of Goeree, Overflakkee, Schouwen-Duiveland and Walcheren, complete with indentation, and even Flanders, they have a dominance of southwest-oriented coastlines. In analogy, we can extend the port of Rotterdam in the direction of the sea with a southwest-oriented boundary as a demarcation line and as an intermunicipal boundary. On the south of it, we have a terrestrial nature reserve area, north of it, port and port-related activities for Rotterdam Port. Plan number 1 is a wedge-shaped addition of new land between Scheveningen North and Hoek of Holland, with a length of 21 kilometers, varying in width from a few meters up Scheveningen North to around 4 kilometers near Hoek of Holland, in which we consider a primary range of dunes of a width and height sufficient for the coming 100 years in the worst climate scenario, and secondary rows of dunes at an angle to the coast. Why these secondary rows of dunes? When we look at the basic street pattern of The Hague, all the main roads are at an angle to the coast, and we see them in de Benoordehoutse de Bezuidenhoutse Laan van Merenvoort, Sportlaan, Zegboeklaan. Why these secondary rows of dunes? They are old dune ridges which were existing, on which footpaths came into being and later roads were paved. And within these dune ridges there used to be valleys, and remnants of these valleys can still be seen in the form of the De Hague Brook, the Haagse Beek, running starting from Kijkduin along Sportlaan, Zegboeklaan, the Hofvijver near the House of Parliaments, the De Hague Wood, het Haagse Bos, Park Klingendaal, beyond the main office of ANWB. There are all remnants of dune ridges and valleys in between, and for reasons of history and landscaping we are extending them in the land reclamation, and we have the advantage that we can create a new land segment after segment using sand from the sea. We are not allowed to catch the sand too near the shore, because then we influence the seabed slope, not too far away, because then it becomes too costly. And we have decided to catch the sand outside the 20-meter depth line in the North Sea, keeping intact the coastal foundation. And in the new land, we have a dominance of nature reserve areas in dune landscape, and at the end, Scheveningen and Hoek van Holland, we have specific developments in the Fourth Scheveningen Harbour, Kam annexes, and a tidal lagoon, Kam annexes near Hoek of Holland. The interesting thing is we can create a new land segment after segment. Coming back to plan number 1, we start with the first segment near Hoek of Holland. That's step 1. Then we extend along the whole coast the dune, covering all the groins because I have discovered that these groins have a net negative effect. I'm coming back to that later. So we extend the coast in a second step. Then we create Spanjaardsduin north of the Van Dykshoorn triangle, which is the first segment. So step 1 is the Van Dykshoorn triangle near Hoek of Holland. Step 2 is Spanjaardsduin, 35 hectares as compensation for the execution of the second Maasplane. And number 3 is covering all the remaining groins with dunes and beaches, because we have discovered that these groins have a net negative effect. Step 4 is the sand engine, the so-called sand engine. Step 5 is a Hoek of Holland segment complete with the tidal lagoon, with port activities and housing, with north of it the nature reserve area. Step 4 is a 4th Scheveningen port with activities around it and a row of dunes protecting the beach stadium. Step 4 is the completion of the whole plan. This is the cross section, and then I'm coming to a next explanation. Good plans have their roots in the past and are pointing to the future. We have to consider the history and the characteristics of the coast between Den Helder and Hoek of Holland. And we notice that we have to deal with a series of geological young dune wedges with in-between narrow spots. Starting in the vicinity of Hoek of Holland, the first dune wedge originates near the small city of Ter Heide, follows the basic street pattern of The Hague and achieving its widest width north of The Hague in the nature reserve area Mijndal, Kijfhoek and Bierlap, which is also an area for the production of dune water. And then comes the next narrow spot, where the old Rhine River, which used to be the main river Rhine in the past, is near Katwijk and Noordwijk with a discharge sluice. And this old Rhine River used to be the northern border of the Roman Empire. Then we have the next dune wedge, which starts at Katwijk Noordwijk, widens to Bloemendaal Zandvoort, also with nature reserve area and with dune water production. And then the next narrow spot is near IJmuiden, where the I, the IJ and Wijker Lake used to be near the coast, and finally the North Sea Channel was dug. And then we have a complicated dune wedge between Wijk aan Zee, Egmond aan Zee, Bergen and Schorel, and then the absence of dunes, the Pettemer, Honsbosse sea defense, and we have a small dune wedge between Petten and Callantsoog. On the western side the sea, on the eastern side also a sea body which was called the Zijpe, and this wedge was surrounded by seawater, and the name of the city is Callantsoog. In analogy with Schiermonnikoog, it used to be a Wadden island, and the same applies to the large small dune wedge between Callantsoog and Den Helder. That is the characteristic of the coast between Den Helder and Hoek of Holland. Interesting is that when we look at the stretch between IJmuiden and Hoek of Holland, we see that the coast of Rhineland, which appears to have no solid sea element, it shows over the hundreds of years a slight accretion, this hollow coast, and exactly where the hollow coast turns into a slight convex coast, we have the coast of the Delftland waterboard, and there we see a retreating coast, and we see the old coastline of 1611. When we consider the coast between Den Helder and Hoek of Holland, we have a series of interesting phenomena. We have the old Maas mouth, which entered the sea and washed away all the dunes and deposited river clay. And this old Maas mouth entered the sea near the small city of Ter Heide. It washed away the old sand ridges and deposited river clay. The name Ter Heide derives of De Hei, which was the name of one of the branches of the old Maas mouth. And in Dutch, the sounds of a, is referring to water. We have the in Amsterdam, we have the Dokkumer river in Friesland, we have the Brabantse A and the Drentse A. And this was the old branch of the river Maas, which was called the Hei. In the Maas mouth were also old sand flats. One of them was called the Heiplaat, which was a sandy plate, a sandy ridge of sand on which the dwelling of Heiplaat came into being. Then we see the old sea boundary in the 11th and 12th century, and we not only have to deal with shifting river mouth with breakthroughs from land towards the sea, but we had to deal and have to deal with sea level rise and higher frequency intensity of storm surges, and we saw the intrusion of sea in the old river mouth with tidal creeks like Boma, Ganter, Lee of Lier, with deposition of sea clay, and beyond it we had peat formation. And in the characteristics of the soil and the internal boundaries between the various parcels of land, we can read the old history of the area. And then with the following storm surges, sand was brought into a sandy inward dune ridge on which a monastery came into being, and the name Monster is derived from that. Later on we had the same effect with the next storm surge coupled with spring tide and gales, and Stravesande came into being on a new dune ridge. And later on the Staalduinse wood was created. When we look carefully, and I'm referring to the older slide, we see the formation of the coastline of 1611, which was washed away, and we have now the opportunity to restore it. The old coastline of 1611 was eroded, and all the sand came into the nature area of De Beer, and the topographical point of De Beer was called Hoek of Holland, 6 kilometers south of the present Hoek of Holland. Then we had the Rotterdam engineer Kaland, who said Rotterdam needs a new way to the sea, and then was dug the new waterway. And in addition to that, a small northern harbour mole was erected near Hoek of Holland, which was extended after the Second World War at a length of 4.7 kilometers, and it was created to achieve calm shipping waterway south of it. And now we can use this extended northern harbour mole on the northern side to create a hollow coastline in addition to the present hollow coast of Rhineland. In the past, we decided centuries ago to protect the Delftland coast with a series of 69 groins perpendicular to the coast. The reason was flood is nearing the coast to an angle, ebb is flowing away to another angle, and this results in a net transport of sand along the coast. As a brake to the sand transport, these groins were erected, and that is their positive function. However, they have a net negative function because they create rip currents flowing sand away from the coast. So we have decided to cover all these groins with dunes and beaches and create a new hollow coastline between Scheveningen North and Hoek of Holland in phases, restoring approximately with a hollow coastline the original coast adjacent to the Rhineland coast. Here you can clearly see the negative effects of these groins. And we already knew that negative function because as a child or as a grown-up visiting the beach near Scheveningen, we were given or gave the warning, do not swim along these groins, because they initiate rip currents which can carry you away from the coast. But not only people can be carried away, but also sand, as you can see, because every groin results in a net flow of sand towards the sea. So therefore we decided to widen the coast, covering all these groins step by step with dunes and beaches. And we already started the first segment of the new coast, which was called the Van Dixhoorn Triangle, with a primary range of dunes following the basic street pattern of The Hague, with a new beach in front. 13 of the 69 groins were covered with dunes, and they are only interesting for next generation of archaeologists to see how we did it wrong in the past by erecting these solid seawall elements perpendicular to the coast, and there's no necessity whatsoever to erect them again at the new coast, which is now completely natural. In this Van Dixhoorn triangle, we have a new nature reserve area, the capital dunes, and we are going to extend the metro line Rotterdam, Hoek of Holland, on the new land, with thousands of houses south of it. And that is the first step in creating the original dune wedge. Here we see the seriously attacked coast near Ter Heide. The protection is not only dune but a combination of dike and dune, and we see clearly the first existing dune wedge between Ter Heide and Kerkduin near The Hague, following the street pattern of The Hague, and vaguely in the distance we see the hollow coastline of Rijnland. And this will be the new situation. We are going to extend the Delftland coast with a new nature reserve area, with walking and cycling paths and eco-domes, and we create near Hoek of Holland a tile lagoon with a fishing harbor also used for offshore servicing. And this will be the situation near Den Haag, Scheveningen, with the new fourth Scheveningen harbor, protection with the sluice of the endangered village of Scheveningen, which is part of The Hague. And in addition to the first, second and third harbor, we will create a new fourth harbor for extension of yachting harbor, for fishing activities, for a water sport center, and for cruise ships with the connection of the Baltic Sea. We have a protection with the dune ridge of the beach stadium common axis, and we can extend the West Dune Park with the new south-oriented beach on the southern side of the harbor. And we can create an underground connection of Scheveningen with the horseshoe-shaped road system around The Hague.